If you have ever heard yourself thinking things like, I'm not doing enough or I'll never get this right, you've already met your critic. But also if you've ever glimpsed a quieter, calmer, inner sense of wisdom that says things like, all right, take a breath, you've got this, then you've also met your inner mentor. Welcome to Oxygen for Educators. I'm one of your hosts, Michelle Kinder. It's our hope to bring you thought-provoking, unscripted conversations full of actionable ideas to fuel your important work in the world. Thanks for tuning in. This space is for you. Hi friends, welcome back to Radical Hope, Inner Work with a Ripple Effect. Today we're exploring the inner critic, that voice we all know too well, and its gentler counterpart, the inner mentor. If you have ever heard yourself thinking things like, I'm not doing enough or I'll never get this right, you've already met your critic. But also if you've ever glimpsed a quieter, calmer, inner sense of wisdom that says things like, all right, take a breath, you've got this, then you've also met your inner mentor. This conversation matters because our relationship to those voices shapes not only how we move through the world, but also how we show up for the people who count on us. We've said it time and time again. Educators objectively are carrying a heavy load, mounting demands, shrinking resources, and the constant hum of crisis in the wider world. In those conditions, the inner critic gets especially loud. Unchecked, that critic wears us down, frays our nervous system, and makes it harder to connect. But the inner critic isn't the essence of who we are, and many of us walk around as if the inner critic and us are one and the same. Instead of thinking about that voice as self with a capital S, we can begin to understand it as a part that is trying to protect us. In fact, sometimes I like to imagine a misguided, fear-driven aunt who loves me and wants desperately for me to be safe, but her comments always land in a way that makes me feel heavier and more anxious instead of light and free. And then I imagine her living in my head. Yikes. That's just one version of an inner critic. Yours may show up differently. When we think our inner critic is ourself with a capital S, it's hard, even impossible, to get some distance from her or change our relationship with her in any meaningful way. It's much easier when we understand her as one character living inside of us, a character who can be thanked for her intention to keep us safe, but reoriented to a more helpful expression of that intention. And we can balance her out by being in a deeper relationship with another character, the inner mentor. Let's dive a little deeper. Tara Mohr, the author of Playing Big, describes the inner critic as a voice rooted in fear. At its core, it wants to keep us safe. Now, that may sound surprising because the critic doesn't feel very protective. It feels mean and harsh, but its actual mission is to keep us from taking risks that could lead to failure, embarrassment, or rejection. The problem is that the critic goes about this in a clumsy way. Instead of saying, I care about you and I don't want you to get hurt, it yells at us like a bad coach on the sidelines. Don't even try. Who do you think you are? You'll never pull this off. And here's the irony. The critic thinks it's protecting us, but what it's really doing is shutting us down. Its attempt at protection leads to paralysis. Tara points out that the critic often disguises itself as the voice of reason. It tells us it's being realistic and responsible. It says things like, "This isn't practical. People will laugh at you. You need to play it safe." But underneath those pronouncements, it's just fear. And it shows up most reliably when we're stepping towards something that really matters to us. That's one of the giveaways. The critic gets loudest right when we're about to grow. If you feel that voice rise up, if suddenly your mind is full of doubt, judgment, or self-attack, there is a good chance you're standing on the edge of something deeply meaningful. So rather than seeing the critic as a truth teller, Tara invites us to see it as a fear-driven protector. And once you recognize it for what it is, you can start to relate to it differently. You don't have to obey it. You don't have to wrestle with it. You can literally disarm her by noticing and naming, "Oh, that's my inner critic trying to keep me safe," and then gently choose another path. So to contrast, if the inner critic is fear's voice, harsh, judgmental, trying to keep us small, then the inner mentor is wisdom's voice. Tara Mohr encourages us to get in touch with our inner mentor, and she suggests picturing our future self, maybe 20 years older and wiser, who already knows how our story unfolds. This part of you has lived through the risks that you're currently afraid of. She's already navigated the failures, the embarrassments, the times you stood out and worried what people thought. And from that vantage point, she knows you are still standing, still loved, and still worthy. When the critic shouts, the inner mentor speaks quietly. When the critic says, "Don't even try, you will mess this up," the inner mentor says, "What matters here is showing up with presence." When the critic pressures you with impossible standards, the inner mentor says, "Progress is enough. Love is enough. Your being here is enough." The tone is radically different. The critic is harsh. The mentor is calm, like a trusted friend or guide. The critic tries to scare you into safety, but the mentor reminds you of the bigger picture of what really matters in the long run. And here's the beautiful part. That inner mentor is already within you. You don't have to earn her voice or access to her. You just have to practice tuning in. Tara suggests a simple visualization, and we'll dip into it now. Imagine yourself 20 years older and picture her or him, where she lives, how she carries herself. Maybe there's calm in her eyes, and you can ask her anything you like. What really matters in this situation? What do you want me to remember? What is the highest and best move for me right now? What you'll find is that her voice is steady, it's compassionate, and it's often startlingly clear. And Tara recently shared 3 reminders about the inner mentor work that I think are so helpful here. First, she says, our inner mentor does not interrupt our everyday thinking. She waits to be invited. That means she needs us to create a little stillness, whether that's writing in a journal, taking a quiet walk, or even imagining making a tea date with her. By contrast, the critic barges in, but the mentor waits to be asked. Second, she reminds us that most people need intentional, regular practices to stay in touch. Meeting your inner mentor once is powerful, but staying connected takes some rhythm. That might look like journaling to her, or picturing her weekly in meditation, or even asking her regularly, how would you handle this situation? And then trying her advice on. And third, Tara says people often wonder, how do I know if I'm hearing my inner mentor or if I'm just making it up? Her guidance is simple and wise. The critic is harsh, wordy, and fear-driven. The inner mentor's voice is calm, loving, succinct, and sometimes surprising. She may not always speak in words. Sometimes it's an image, a knowing smile, or a steady sense of peace. If you're worried you're making it up, but it's serving you, you can trust that you're in relationship with some part of you, some higher knowing that is giving you a sense of groundedness and clarity, and that's perfect. So don't get caught in the question, am I making this up? Especially if it's working for you. I love the distinctions between the ways the two voices show up because it helps us recognize when we're hearing fear and when we're hearing wisdom. Let's pause for a moment and practice. Everybody take a breath and begin picturing your inner mentor. Maybe she shows up as your future self, maybe as an image or a presence you sense more than you see. However she shows up is perfect. Now think of something in your life right now that feels uncertain or heavy and invite her perspective. Notice the tone of her response. Is she calm, simple, loving? Is what she have to say surprising? Pay attention how different it feels to connect to that inner voice as compared to the critic's inner voice. And thank her for showing up for you. And remember that that practice just took a few seconds, and it's something that's available to you that you can return to anytime and anywhere. When the critic pipes up, and it will, don't collapse under it. Notice it and thank it for trying to protect you. And then turn your ear toward that wiser voice, the one that calls you not into fear, but into freedom. Internal Family Systems, or IFS, helps us here too. Richard Schwartz describes the critic as a part of us. And that's an important distinction that we touched on at the beginning. It isn't all of who we are, and it also isn't inherently bad. Not unlike Tara Mohr, he writes that it is usually trying to protect us from failure, rejection, or shame. Its job is protection, but its methods are fear-based and often outdated. IFS gives us a different way to relate to this part. Instead of fusing with it, believing the critic's voice is the whole truth about who we are, we can notice it as just one voice among many inside us. That creates a little space, and in that space, something powerful becomes possible. We can turn toward the critic with curiosity by asking questions like, what are you trying to protect me from? When did you first take on this job? If you knew I was old enough and strong enough to protect our system, what job would you rather do? Or how old do you feel? Often these parts are carrying old burdens from childhood or early life experiences when inner criticism might have literally helped us or parts of us survive. The surprising news is that the critic doesn't need to be banished. It needs leadership. In IFS, that leadership comes from self with a capital S, that calm, compassionate, centered presence at the core of who we are. Self isn't reactive. It doesn't shame the critic for being there. Instead, self listens. Self acknowledges the protective intent and brings a sense of balance, reminding the critic it doesn't have to run the whole show. And here's where the shift happens. When we are in self, we can hear the critic without being overtaken by it. We can thank it for its effort and still choose a different voice to lead us forward, the voice of the inner mentor, the part of us that embodies wisdom, compassion, and vision. In other words, the critic gets a seat at the table, but it doesn't get the head seat anymore. Let's take a look at an everyday example. Let's imagine you're at work. When the critic is in charge and you are about to speak up in a staff meeting, you might think, don't embarrass yourself. You're not as smart as the others. That might make you shrink back, stay silent, and then later beat yourself up for not contributing. When the self or the mentor is in charge, you still hear the critic, but instead of believing it, you pause, take a breath, and remind yourself, I care deeply about this work. My perspective is valid. You speak up, and maybe it's a little shaky, but it's aligned with your values. The critic is like a nervous backseat driver gripping the seat and yelling directions. The mentor or the self is the calm driver with hands on the wheel, acknowledging the nervous passenger, but saying, I've got this. The critic doesn't disappear. It just relaxes when it knows that self or the inner mentor is steering. To understand the different ways the inner critic might show up, let's also take a look at the work of therapists Jay Early and Bonnie Weiss. Jay and Bonnie have a framework that explores 7 distinct types of critics. You may recognize all 7 in your inner cast, or you might really resonate with 1 or 2 of these. The first one is the perfectionist. It says things like, it has to be flawless or you'll be judged. An educator example might be that you're preparing a lesson and you're hearing, this will never be good enough. The inner mentor response might be to thank it for caring about quality, but remind it that good enough is enough. The second is the taskmaster. It's work harder, never stop. An educator example might be that you're grading at midnight and you're hearing, you can't take a break, you'll fall behind. The mentor response could gently reassure it and remind it that rest makes us better and that pausing is part of the work. The third type of inner critic is the inner controller. The vibe of this one is stay in line, don't slip up. An educator example might be you're feeling guilty for skipping one after school duty. The mentor response might be something like, I hear you, but balance matters too. The fourth example is the underminer. The underminer tells us things like, Don't even try, you'll fail. An educator example might be doubting your ability to apply for a leadership role. And the inner mentor might respond by saying, "Thank you for wanting to keep me safe, but growth requires showing up and taking risks." Number 5 is the guilt tripper. Says things like, "You should have done better." An educator example would be replaying a tough conversation with a student. And the mentor response might be something much more balanced, like, "I learned from this, and I can carry the lesson without the shame." Number 6 of 7 is the destroyer. The destroyer tells us things like, "You're not worthy." This one is brutal because it questions our value at a core level. Our inner mentor responds to this destroyer critic with something like, "I am enough as I am, and my worth is not on trial." And last is the conformist, urging us to blend in and not stand out. Educator example would be holding back a bold idea in a staff meeting. The mentor response: authenticity is how you connect. It's okay to bring your whole self to this situation. These voices might sound different, but they share one goal: protection. They think they're shielding us. The tragedy is, left unchecked or without inner leadership from the mentor or the self, they keep us small. Here are 5 tools that you can start using today. The first is to spot the voice. Ask yourself, which critic is speaking, and label it. The second is to create a little distance. Say, "My critic is telling me ... instead of "I am ... or "I feel ... The third is to dialogue with compassion. Ask the inner critic what it fears, and then reassure it, hoping it might loosen its grip. The fourth is to bring in the mentor actively, pausing and asking your future self for perspective. And the fifth is to choose one small action. And by the way, when you do this, don't wait for silence, because remember, the inner critic may not stop talking in all of its anxiety. You move forward even if the critic is still talking. All of this great information came from 3 resources that I can recommend. The first is Tara Mohr's Playing Big. When I tell you that I have shared that book with hundreds of leaders at this point, I'm not exaggerating. And without exception, it has been received as life-changing and enormously helpful. So please go check that out. The second is Jay Early and Bonnie Weiss's Freedom from Your Inner Critic. And the third is Richard Schwartz' No Bad Parts. As we close, I want to leave you with 3 ideas that have shaped the way I think about the inner mentor. First, Tara Mohr reminds us your inner mentor is a version of you that is wise, grounded, loving, and courageous. She is you, but without the fear. That's who we're calling on when the critic is loud, not some distant, perfect self, but the deeper wisdom that's already in us. And Parker Palmer says, quote, "We listen for guidance everywhere except from within, and yet the soul is generous. It will speak truth if we are willing to listen." What if this week you carved out just a few quiet moments to listen for that soul truth, to ask your inner mentor one simple question, and then wait and see what arises. Finally, Howard Thurman offers this: don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Your inner mentor longs for you to come alive, not by silencing the critic, but by trusting your wisdom, your voice, and your aliveness. That is radical hope. Next time, we're going to be talking about a concept called coping flexibility, which can be a huge difference maker in rapidly changing times. Thanks a bunch for spending this time with us. It really, really means a lot. If this resonates, let us hear from you, or please pass it along and invite someone else to join our growing community. Hope you have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Oxygen for Educators. Please like, share, and follow, and if inclined, leave us a 5-star review so that we can keep making content for you. Let us hear from you if you know someone we should interview or a topic we should cover.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization. The content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to use their own judgment and seek appropriate professional support when needed. Oxygen for Educators, its host, and production partners are not responsible for any actions taken based on the information shared in this podcast.